Before we begin, do you enjoy listening to our show? Consider subscribing on your preferred podcast platform or supporting us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Link is in the show notes. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Night Watch Files. On a cold, clear Friday evening on January 2nd, 1976, an intricate and highly secretive operation was set into motion. A man using the codename Kevin picked up a telephone and called Massachusetts State Police Major John Regan at his home. "It's Kevin. It's on," the caller announced. Kevin issued a strict set of instructions demanding that Regan drive to a specific location using his wife's 1969 black Buick and bring 2 sets of car keys. When the major protested using his wife's vehicle, Kevin immediately threatened to call off the entire exchange, forcing the detective to comply. Hours later, Major Regan and Assistant U.S. Attorney David Toomey were waiting at the parking lot of a Holiday Inn in Randolph, Massachusetts. As they waited in the dark, a man emerged from the shadows dressed in deep blue denim and concealing his face beneath a dark green ski mask. Approaching the vehicle, the masked man delivered a scripted greeting, stating that it was a beautiful night out. When Major Regan correctly replied about the stars, Kevin climbed into the back seat of the car. He immediately demanded identification from both men and asked if they were carrying firearms. Both officials lied, assuring the masked man they were unarmed. Taking command of the situation, Kevin ordered Regan and Toomey out of the vehicle, instructing them to wait inside a disco nightclub and leave 1 set of car keys behind. The 2 men complied. Neither knew exactly how the evening would end. What they did know was that somewhere nearby was an object that powerful people had been searching for months. And for the first time, it appeared someone was finally willing to give it back. Boston in the 1960s and 1970s produced a myriad of hardened criminals, but none quite like Myles J. Connor Jr. A member of Mensa who was bright enough to be offered a spot at Harvard University to study medicine, Connor was a 5'2", fiery, red-headed rock and roll frontman with a genius-level IQ and an insatiable appetite for Japanese antiquities. He grew up in the quiet suburb of Milton, Massachusetts, the son of a highly respected and honest police officer, Joe Connor. Yet Myles traced his rebellious streak to his paternal grandfather, an Irish immigrant who fled his homeland after shooting 2 constables, and his maternal lineage, which connected him to the revolutionary pamphleteer Thomas Paine. It was his maternal grandfather, Charles Johnson, however, who shaped his ultimate obsession by taking young Myles on frequent trips to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, immersing him in a world of Asian artifacts, old master paintings, and samurai swords. As a teenager, Connor's eccentricities were already apparent. He kept a menagerie of dangerous exotic pets in his home, including a 5-foot cobra, a tarantula, a wildcat, and an alligator named Albert that lived in his attic. By his late teens, Connor was a local legend billed as the president of rock and roll. Fronting his band, the Wild Ones, he commanded club stages across New England, compensating for his short stature with raw, electric charisma and an unbridled enthusiasm that left him drenched in sweat every night. He was a natural showman who would ride his Harley-Davidson motorcycle directly onto stages or pop out of a coffin to open a set. Audiences were captivated by his vast vocal range, which allowed him to seamlessly transition from Roy Orbison's soaring countertenor to Johnny Cash's gravelly bass baritone. His charm was highly effective off stage as well. He once convinced an admiring bank teller to give him the schedule for armored car pickups, allowing him to effortlessly drive away with tens of thousands of pre-bundled dollars. He was fiercely protective of his performances and his bandmates, including his teenage manager and bassist, Al Dottoli. On one occasion, when a heckler threw a beer bottle at his head demanding he play the Tennessee Waltz, Connor took off his guitar, jumped off the stage, beat the larger man into submission, climbed back up, and crooned the requested ballad. Behind the rock star persona, Connor's criminality was governed by a strict personal code of honor modeled after Samurai Bushido. He vowed never to act as an informant, never to harm vulnerable populations, and never to steal from friends or those in need. But museums and wealthy estates were fair game, and he rationalized his estimated 30 museum heists with a simple philosophy, believing that any valuable antique had already been stolen from someone else at some point in its history. His first major museum theft in March 1965 was born not of greed, but of vengeance. After the wealthy backers of the Forbes House Museum in Milton baselessly humiliated his police officer father by interrogating him over missing antique guns, an incensed Connor drove to the museum after hours. He easily popped open a basement window, wiggled his agile frame inside, and loaded his van with historic items, including a Paul Revere silver plate, exacting his own form of justice without leaving a single clue behind. Later that spring, his thirst for collecting led him to the Boston Children's Museum, which housed an impressive but largely hidden collection of Japanese artifacts. Donning the guise of Dr. Michael Joseph, a credentialed Ivy League researcher, Connor used his genuine encyclopedic knowledge of Asian art to win over the curators and secure a private tour of the storage vaults. Once he learned the artifacts would remain permanently off view, he decided to liberate them. He returned under the cover of darkness, scaled a drain pipe to the roof, secured a rope to a chimney, and rappelled down to an attic window, casually loading his favorite items into a shoulder bag before disappearing back into the night. Connor's brazenness extended far beyond Massachusetts. During a July 1965 visit to family in Sullivan, Maine, he decided to burgle the estate of a recently deceased wealthy woman simply because he had heard she despised her daughter who was set to inherit her antiques. Caught carrying a grandfather clock out to his Cadillac by a local sheriff's deputy, Connor used his martial arts skills to disarm the officer, fired warning shots into the ground, blasted the police radio in the cruiser so the deputy could not call for help, and sped off. He was captured shortly after and locked in the Hancock County Jail. Channeling the mythos of John Dillinger, Connor spent 5 days thoroughly carving a fake gun out of a bar of soap, blackening it with shoe polish. On July 26th, he pulled the soap gun on a deputy and a jail trustee, struck them with karate blows, and broke out of the jail, swimming across rivers and hiding in the freezing woods while a massive manhunt of bloodhounds and aircraft scoured the area. By April 1966, Connor was a fugitive once again. When Massachusetts State Police Corporal Jack O'Donovan and Boston detectives cornered him near a Beacon Street phone booth, O'Donovan drew his weapon and ordered Connor to drop his. Connor yelled back, "Drop yours," and a shootout erupted. Connor intentionally aimed low to avoid a mortal wound, striking O'Donovan in the abdomen. Detectives returned fire, hitting Connor multiple times as he fled up a fire escape. Bleeding heavily from bullets that shattered his spleen and struck his kidney, spine, liver, and stomach, he leaped across a 10-foot gap between 5-story rooftops before finally being tackled. Angry police officers beat him severely on the roof until a fire captain intervened to save his life. Miraculously, he survived, and while entering the notorious Walpole State Prison to serve his sentence, Myles Connor quickly found that his lawless reputation, which had made him a pariah in polite society, provided him with immense cachet behind bars. Despite being only 24 years old, Connor's undeniable intelligence, toughness, and charisma earned him the respect and confidence of the facility's older and most hardened criminals. He naturally assumed a leadership role within the inmate population, eventually being elected president of the Walpole Prison Jaycees. This leadership was put to the ultimate test on St. Patrick's Day in 1972, when Walpole erupted into a violent riot. Following a knifing in the maximum security wing while many inmates were watching a film, chaos consumed the facility. Inmates set fires in 2 of the prison's wings, broke locks, and used weightlifting equipment as makeshift sledgehammers to smash open cells and free other prisoners. As brawls broke out across the tiers, overwhelmed guards found themselves cornered and were forced to retreat from the smoke and escalating violence. Seeking an end to the destruction, the warden made the strategic decision to directly approach Connor to broker a truce. Acting as the voice of the rioting population, Connor negotiated an agreement with the warden, which he then presented to the inmates. A 5-man arbitrating team was convened, and through his diplomatic maneuvering, Connor successfully secured a number of unprecedented concessions for the prisoners. His efforts won the inmates access to televisions, the institution of conjugal visits, furloughs for certain prisoners, and even the opportunity to attend lectures given by visiting Harvard University professors. With peace restored to the facility, Connor reflected on his role as a peacemaker, noting that he deemed it an honor to be so trusted by his peers. Acknowledging the warden's willingness to compromise, Connor stated that the official had made a judgmental error but had lived up to it, adding that every person in the prison was there because they too had made mistakes, and that the best man tries to better himself. The prison administration was highly impressed with Connor's ability to peacefully resolve the dangerous uprising. Accompanied by a letter of support from Massachusetts State Police Detective John Regan, the accolades from prison officials paid the ultimate dividend. Believing the parole board felt they owed him for his crucial intervention, Connor was granted an early release and walked out of Walpole on parole in October 1972. The operation to rob the sprawling Woolworth estate in Monmouth, Maine, originated with a local connection. Charlie Crafts, a convicted felon from Massachusetts whose parents owned a neighboring campsite, realized the immense potential of the wealthy property. Knowing the family's vast collection had already been victimized by a major art theft 2 years prior, Crafts relayed the intelligence to his friend, Richard "Dickie" Donati. Recognizing the need for an expert, Donati immediately enlisted the help of Myles Connor. Traveling to Monmouth, Connor and Donati surveyed the estate, noting that the home was conveniently set back from the road and completely obscured by woods. Peering through the windows, Donati admired the oriental rugs while Connor's discerning eye locked onto the fine art. Astoundingly, despite the previous burglary that cost the family 50 paintings, the duo discovered the estate remained entirely devoid of security systems. Returning to Crafts' camp, the men finalized their plan for a weekend raid. Under the cover of darkness during the weekend of May 25, 1974, Connor, Donati, and 2 accomplices arrived at the estate in a borrowed green van bearing Massachusetts license plates. Approaching the rear door on the east side of the mansion, the thieves used a blue Stanley Wonder Bar to pry the entrance open, snapping the latch and inadvertently leaving streaks of blue paint on the white door jamb. Once inside, the crew moved efficiently. One accomplice was dispatched to a west side bedroom balcony to keep watch over the road for any approaching vehicles or silent alarms, while the others scoured the house for valuables. Maintaining his characteristic composure, Connor focused on high-value targets that ordinary burglars might ignore. He immediately identified 2 7-foot-tall Simon Willard grandfather clocks, and he and Donati carefully hoisted the massive antique timepieces into their waiting van. As they moved through the home, Donati shone his flashlight onto several framed paintings. Connor instantly recognized them as masterworks by the renowned American artists Andrew and N.C. Wyeth. The thieves removed the small illumination lights attached to the frames and retrieved a sheet and a blanket from a third-floor bedroom to gently wrap and protect the delicate canvases. In the darkness, they secured 3 original N.C. Wyeth paintings, including the original cover illustration for Treasure Island, Pennsylvania Farmer, and Dark Harbor Fisherman. They also rolled up 2 pieces by Andrew Wyeth, Lost Balloon, and a reproduction of Distant Thunder, that even the expert Connor mistook for an original in the poor lighting. Over the course of a leisurely hour, the gang thoroughly ransacked the unoccupied mansion. In addition to the grandfather clocks and the Wyeths, the thieves loaded 17 other paintings and an assortment of smaller antiques into the van. Sweeping through the master bedroom, they scooped up trays of jewelry, unaware they were taking mere costume pieces rather than precious gems, and smashed open a plastic bottle to steal the loose change and a $20 bill inside. In their haste, the crew left behind a few subtle clues inside the estate, abandoning an empty box of Howard Johnson's fried clams and leaving a black police-style flashlight resting in the master bedroom. With 22 paintings and the rest of their illicit haul securely packed into the green van, Connor and his crew drove off into the night entirely undetected. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On July 18, 1974, Myles Connor was flawlessly juggling his dual identities on Cape Cod, unaware that a massive federal trap was closing in around him. Connor was scheduled to play a highly anticipated sold-out concert that evening at the popular Mashpee nightclub on the Rocks, sharing a bill with blues legend James Cotton and the doo-wop group Sha Na Na. However, earlier that day, Connor had to attend to his other profession. Dickie Donati had arranged a meeting with a New York antiques dealer who was purportedly interested in purchasing the 4 highly valuable Wyeth paintings. Unbeknownst to the thieves, Donati's contact was actually an undercover FBI agent. To execute the sale, Connor rented a rider van, retrieved the stolen masterpieces from a stash house on a farm in western Massachusetts, and met up with his accomplices at the Merry Meadow Motel in Mashpee. With the illicit handoff scheduled for later that day, Connor took a detour to local radio station WCOD to promote his upcoming concert. During the interview, the host asked Connor if he had finally put his notorious criminal past behind him. Connor earnestly assured the listeners that his lawless days were over and that his sole focus was now his music career. The profound irony of this declaration was not lost on the team of armed federal agents, led by FBI Special Agent Bernie Murphy, who were sitting in unmarked cars in a nearby parking lot, listening to the broadcast as they waited for Connor to return. The FBI had been quietly tracking the thieves' green getaway van and followed Connor and his associates from their motel to a Harwich home and then to a shopping center parking lot for the handoff. With Connor behind the wheel, 2 men, ostensibly the New York antiques dealers, James Bishop and Donald Molansky, approached the rider van and opened the rear doors. An FBI agent nonchalantly coasted by, visually confirming the presence of the stolen paintings inside. Moments later, a swarm of federal agents descended on the vehicle with their weapons drawn, arresting Connor and the 2 other men. Special Agent Murphy handcuffed the elusive thief and placed him in the back of his cruiser. Relishing the monumental capture, Murphy looked at Connor and taunted, "Let's see you get out of this one, Connor." Unfazed, the thief calmly replied, "Wait and see." Connor was subsequently transported to the Barnstable County Jail for processing. Meanwhile, just down the street at On the Rocks, Connor's lifelong friend and production manager Aldo Toli was having a beer with the club manager while prepping the sound equipment for the evening's show. Hearing a sudden cacophony of police sirens wailing past the venue, Dottoli turned to the manager and presciently remarked, "Myles isn't coming." During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Massachusetts earned the unhappy distinction of becoming an American epicenter for art theft, driven by a combination of vulnerable institutions and an evolving criminal underworld. For local criminals, museums presented a highly attractive alternative to robbing banks. Security practices at the time were often remarkably lax. Many priceless artifacts sat completely untethered on tables or were hung from simple wall hooks rather than being bolted down. Storage areas were particularly vulnerable, as inventory checks were so rare that thieves could simply pose as visiting academics, gain access to restricted vaults, and pilfer items that might not be missed by staff for years. While some major institutions possessed formidable nighttime security systems, criminals quickly realized they could entirely bypass these alarms by executing brazen smash-and-grab raids during the day when the buildings were open to the public. Casing the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in the mid-1970s, thieves noted that the institution suffered from weak physical security and lacked theft insurance altogether, making it an ideal target because the museum's board would be forced to offer massive private ransoms independent of law enforcement constraints. Initially, the concept of the sophisticated professional art thief was largely a myth, as most culprits were opportunistic criminals who quickly discovered that highly recognizable masterpieces were virtually impossible to fence on the open market. However, instead of deterring thefts, this realization shifted the criminal attitude towards stolen art. Thieves increasingly began to view stolen masterpieces not as items for illicit financial liquidation, but as sovereign instruments of legal leverage. Masterpieces became high-value hostages used by criminals to extort insurance companies or to negotiate favorable plea bargains and reduce sentences from prosecutors. This escalating trend deeply concerned law enforcement, particularly as the thefts transitioned from stealthy nighttime burglaries to violent armed robberies that put the public and museum staff at extreme risk. In May 1972, this violence culminated in the first known gunpoint robbery of an American museum. Acting under the direction of career criminal Florian Almonde, two thieves entered the Worcester Art Museum during operating hours and removed a Rembrandt, a Picasso, and two Gauguin paintings from the walls. As they fled with the artwork, a security guard shouted at them for stepping on an ancient Roman mosaic. The thieves shot the elderly guard in the abdomen with their only bullet and escaped to hide the million-dollar haul in a hayloft on a Rhode Island pig farm. The guard's life was saved by a visiting nurse, and the thieves were eventually apprehended after bragging about the heist in a local bar, later attempting to use the hidden paintings to bargain for a lighter sentence. The audacity of regional thieves struck again in December 1973 at Harvard University's Fogg Museum, resulting in the largest antique coin heist in history. The thieves employed a deceptive ruse, leaving a shopping bag at the museum during the day and calling to request that the birthday gift be held until the owner could retrieve it. When a man arrived around midnight to collect the bag, the night watchman opened the door and was instantly met with a revolver and 5 armed thieves. The gang stole millions of dollars in ancient gold coins, a large portion of which was later recovered by Massachusetts State Police Detective John Regan, who found them buried in a wooded area inside a duffel bag and a red fishing tackle box. With museums, university estates, and galleries being targeted with alarming frequency, authorities found themselves battling a localized epidemic where art and antiquities were routinely weaponized to subvert the criminal justice system. In the summer of 1974, Myles Connor found his luck rapidly running out following the disastrous undercover FBI sting operation on Cape Cod. Connor was staring down a bleak future with immense sentencing exposure, including a potential 15-year state prison sentence for the main burglary that yielded the Wyeths, alongside severe federal trafficking charges. By other calculations, he faced up to 10 years in prison for trafficking the art, and an additional 3 for violating his parole, effectively promising to end his dual career as a rock musician and criminal. Desperate to escape his pending prison sentence, but governed by a strict personal code that forbade him from ever acting as an informant, Connor needed an unconventional solution. While out on bail, he arranged a meeting with Massachusetts State Police Major John Regan, an unimpeachably honest detective who was also an old friend of Connor's police officer father, Joe. When Connor asked Regan if there was any realistic mechanism to resolve his legal jeopardy and escape the fix he was in, the straight-laced cop delivered a blunt and hyperbolic assessment of Connor's severe legal exposure. Regan told him that it would take Nothing short of a Rembrandt to get you out of this one. While Major Regan likely meant the remark as a colorful way to emphasize that Connor's situation was hopeless, the thief interpreted the comment as a literal operational strategy. Connor would later recall his reaction to the detective's statement, remembering that he replied, "You know, you're right," and that he immediately set my heart on getting a Rembrandt. He realized that stealing a masterpiece of sufficient cultural and financial prominence would provide him with the ultimate leverage, creating a high-value hostage that he could trade back to prosecutors to force a highly favorable plea bargain and bypass federal sentencing guidelines. Connor's thinking regarding this bargaining power was entirely devoid of the usual criminal motives. He knew that a famous masterpiece could never be liquidated for cash on the black market, but he recognized that its true value lay in its utility as a legal shield. As he later explained his philosophy, when you steal something from a major museum and you don't take it out of storage and it's going to be missed, then the major purpose is to use that as a bargaining chip to help either oneself or somebody else out of a jackpot. Connor reasoned that targeting a highly recognizable, loaned and insured painting would trigger immense public and political panic. The disappearance of such a work would place tremendous pressure on the museum's board, private owners, and insurance underwriters, ultimately forcing the district attorney's office to take any recovery proposal seriously. Additionally, Connor felt no moral compunction about holding cultural heritage hostage, operating under the rationalization that any antique that is worth something has been stolen at one point from somebody in its history. As he viewed the strategy, they were going to get the paintings back. I was going to get money, and so there was no harm done other than to the insurance company or the billionaire patrons. Armed with this master plan, Connor set out to find the perfect Rembrandt to steal. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. According to Connor's own documented claims, though the true extent of his accomplice's intentions remains speculative, he and fellow criminal Bobby Donati heavily cased the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in 1974. Walking through the Venetian-style palazzo, the two men observed that the institution lacked adequate physical security and was completely devoid of theft insurance, making it an ideal target for extortion. During these reconnaissance trips, Donati took a specific interest in a Napoleonic eagle finial, while Connor admired an ancient Chinese bronze gu. Ultimately, however, Connor stated that he abandoned the idea of robbing the Gardner at that time and instead shifted his focus directly across the street to the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, or MFA. Connor's confidence in targeting major institutions was significantly bolstered by a spontaneous and highly successful heist in western Massachusetts in early 1975. On the afternoon of February 8th, Connor visited the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College to indulge his appreciation for fine art. After a hostile encounter with the museum's director, Frank Trapp, an insulted Connor decided to return that same snowy night to exact revenge. Utilizing his practiced eye for security vulnerabilities, Connor noted the unalarmed windows and easily popped one open, breaking into the facility with two accomplices. Within minutes, he casually removed valuable Dutch paintings, including a work by Peter Lassman, from their frames and drove them back to Boston. This remarkably easy burglary proved his methods and whet his appetite for leveraging art crime, setting up his belief that museums were highly vulnerable targets. His reconnaissance of the MFA was thorough and tactically astute. He explicitly rejected a nighttime burglary, recognizing that the museum's overnight security systems were too formidable to bypass undetected. Instead, he concluded that a daytime smash-and-grab raid during a weekday lunch hour, when guard shifts rotated and visitor density was low, would allow him to completely bypass the facility's perimeter alarms. Connor carefully selected his target, Rembrandt's portrait of Elsbeth van Rijn, based on specific physical and tactical vulnerabilities. He observed that the small wooden panel was highly portable and suspended from a simple wall hook rather than bolted down like the permanent collection. Also, the painting was located in the Dutch Gallery, conveniently situated up a staircase near the museum's less trafficked rear Fenway entrance, providing an ideal escape route into Boston's congested streets. To confirm these security weaknesses, Connor enlisted his 21-year-old associate, Steve Gorski, for a daring reconnaissance mission. On Sunday, April 13, 1975, the day before the planned heist, Gorski entered the MFA near closing time and approached the Rembrandt. Acting on Connor's direct orders, Gorski physically lifted the priceless masterpiece off the wall to test for hidden security measures. Standing alone with the heavy panel in his hands for approximately 2 minutes, Gorski verified that there were no silent alarms, security screws, or immediate guard responses. He placed the painting back on its hooks and reported to Connor that the masterpiece was completely unsecured and ready to be taken. Armed with this intelligence, Connor finalized his operational blueprint on the morning of April 14th at a car wash in Brockton, Massachusetts. He assembled a crew of trusted associates, including Billy Skinner to assist him inside the gallery, and Ralph Petroziello to drive the getaway van. He assigned other accomplices to drive crash cars designed to stall and block pursuing police cruisers on the narrow roads outside the museum, and even planned for a woman with a baby carriage to jam the lobby doors if an automated lockdown occurred. During this final planning discussion, Connor issued a strict and documented directive to his heavily armed crew. Violence was strictly prohibited, and their firearms were to be used solely to fire warning shots to scare off potential heroes. With the intelligence gathered and the team thoroughly briefed, the thieves drove north to Boston to execute the raid. On the overcast morning of Monday, April 14, 1975, Myles Connor and his heavily armed crew assembled at Ralph Petroziello's car wash in Brockton, Massachusetts, to finalize the details of their brazen daytime museum raid. Connor reviewed the assignments, issuing a strict directive to his accomplices that violence was prohibited and firearms were only to be used to fire warning shots if absolutely necessary. The team drove north toward Boston in a convoy of stolen and rigged vehicles. They targeted a Monday lunch hour because the Boston Red Sox were playing out of town and visitor traffic at the Museum of Fine Arts was at its lightest. Around noon, the vehicles pulled into the circular driveway of the museum's Fenway entrance. To conceal his identity, Connor wore a long blonde wig topped with a brown leather chauffeur's cap, a coat, and dark glasses to hide his bright blue eyes. His partner for the inside job, Billy Skinner, wore a wig of shoulder-length dark hair. Outside the museum, their backup team moved into position. Petroziello and Mickey Finn waited in the getaway van, while Bobby Fromm and Billy Hogan sat in designated crash cars ready to block police. Tommy Marr idled in a sedan rigged to overheat and stall traffic on the Fenway, while a female associate positioned herself near the lobby with a baby carriage containing a doll, ready to jam the automated doors if a lockdown occurred. Connor and Skinner purchased tickets and passed through the lobby turnstiles like ordinary visitors. They climbed the museum's hemicyclic marble staircase to the second-floor Robert Dawson Evans galleries for paintings. Making their way to the Dutch and Flemish art gallery, they located their target tucked around a corner near works by Rubens and Van Dyck, Rembrandt's portrait of Elsbeth van Rijn. Stepping to either side of the masterpiece, the two men lifted the heavy mahogany panel directly off its hooks. The extraction was suddenly interrupted when MFA security guard Vito Magaletta stumbled upon the scene. In a thick Italian accent, Magaletta demanded to know what they were doing with the painting. Connor leveled a Walther semi-automatic pistol at the guard and threatened to kill him if he did not shut up. Magaletta wisely retreated behind a gallery wall and blew his security whistle. The piercing sound echoed down the marble staircase, reaching the ears of John Monkuski, a 66-year-old retired Boston police officer working as a guard near the Fenway entrance. As Connor and Skinner rushed down the stairs to the first floor, The unarmed Monkuski intercepted them. Skinner violently pistol-whipped the elderly guard in the head, sending him crashing to the floor. Magaletta, watching from above, saw the blow and the resulting blood. Skinner easily fled through the exit, but Connor's escape was delayed when he and the rigid wooden painting became wedged inside the narrow lobby turnstile. As Connor forcefully squeezed himself through, 4 pieces of the ornate gold frame broke off and clattered to the floor. Realizing the exterior doors had not automatically locked, Connor bypassed his associate with the baby carriage and bounded down the 15 exterior steps toward the waiting vehicles. Despite his bleeding head wound, Monkuski scrambled to his feet and pursued the thieves outside. The guard managed to grab hold of the wooden panel as Connor was loading it into the van, refusing to let go. In response, Petroziello aimed an automatic rifle directly at Monkuski's face from inside the van. Connor yelled for his partner not to shoot the guard. Warning shots rang out. Witnesses later reported hearing 3 shots, incorrectly attributing them to either Skinner or Connor, whose hands were occupied, forcing the terrified Monkuski to finally release his grip. With the painting secured, Skinner jumped into a black and gold Ford Torino crash car while Connor fled in the van. The vehicles sped away onto the Fenway, avoiding the stalled traffic maneuver entirely. Instead of taking the highway, the thieves outsmarted the police by driving locally to the nearby Bromley Heath housing projects in Jamaica Plain. There, they transferred the Rembrandt into a Ford LTD driven by associate Ozzie DePriest, while the Torino was driven to Roxbury Crossing and abandoned. Back at the museum, a chaotic scene unfolded as emergency medical technicians treated Monkuski's head lacerations and transported him to the hospital. 11 Boston detectives and 12 FBI agents swarmed the museum, collecting eyewitness accounts and processing the crime scene. Investigators recovered the 4 broken frame fragments, a spent bullet, and a discarded rubber glove, leaving them with very little physical evidence to trace. An all-points bulletin was quickly broadcast for 2 armed men, inaccurately described as being in their early 20s. Meanwhile, Myles Connor sat alone in the Ford LTD, quietly admiring the world-famous masterpiece in his hands. Once he had taken a moment to study the face of the young woman, he drove the painting to the Randolph home of his trusted friend, Lenny Biondi. The 2 men carefully wrapped the Rembrandt in a sleeping bag and slid it underneath the bed of Biondi's elderly mother-in-law, completely concealing the multi-million-dollar hostage. Meanwhile, Myles Connor skipped his impending federal trial for a prior art theft and went on the run, hiding in an upscale oceanfront apartment in Cohasset with his girlfriend. With the thieves leaving almost no physical evidence, recovery efforts initially stagnated, prompting the painting's insurers to hire First Security Services Corporation, which placed an advertisement in the Boston Globe offering a confidential reward for the artwork's safe return. The prospect of a massive payout drew the intense interest of bounty hunters, private investigators, and the criminal underworld. This pressure quickly fell upon Connor's law-abiding best friend, music production manager Al Dottoli. The situation escalated dangerously when Rudy Guarino, an emissary for ruthless New England mafia boss Raymond L.S. Patriarca, arrived at Dottoli's home in a black Cadillac limousine. Guarino opened a briefcase containing $60,000 in cash, offering it as a down payment for the Rembrandt, and stating that Raymond and the guys would appreciate the painting's surrender. Terrified of Patriarca's vast and violent reach, Dottoli realized the situation was spiraling out of control and decided he had to help facilitate the artwork's return to get the mafia off his back. In September 1975, the FBI ambushed and captured Connor at a Bonanza family restaurant in South Hadley, Massachusetts, locking him in the squalid Charles Street jail. Facing immense sentencing exposure for federal trafficking charges and a state parole violation, Connor enacted his master strategy. He would use the stolen Rembrandt as a high-value hostage to subvert the criminal justice system and bypass federal sentencing guidelines. His father visited him in jail and urged him to speak with Massachusetts State Police Major John Regan. Connor met with Regan and vaguely indicated that, For the right price, he could have a trusted associate recover the artwork. Behind the scenes, Connor's defense attorney, Martin Leppo, initiated high-stakes negotiations with Assistant U.S. Attorney David Twomey and U.S. Attorney James Gabriel. FBI Special Agent Bernie Murphy vehemently opposed the arrangement, arguing that trading a master thief's freedom for a painting made no sense, but he was ultimately overruled by prosecutors and state police who were eager for the publicity of recovering a world-famous masterpiece. To prove he truly controlled the asset, Connor had an associate take a Polaroid photograph of the back of the wooden panel, a perspective nearly impossible to fake, and delivered it to Leppo as proof of life. The government eventually agreed to an unprecedented and highly controversial immunity agreement. Connor's potential 10-year federal sentence was reduced to a consolidated 4-year term to be served concurrently in a state facility rather than a federal penitentiary, and he was granted absolute immunity for the armed robbery of the Museum of Fine Arts. Connor ultimately served only 28 months of this sentence. With the legal framework secured, Connor arranged the logistics of the handoff from his jail cell. He directed Dottoli, operating under the code name Kevin, to retrieve a sealed letter from a bartender at the Sands Cafe in Dorchester. The missive contained strict directives forbidding the involvement of the FBI, insurance men, or the mafia, and authorized Dottoli's backup to shoot anyone who tried to intercept the transfer. Dottoli, utilizing his extensive experience organizing stadium rock concerts, carefully planned a highly secure exchange for the evening of January 2, 1976. The atmosphere surrounding the arrangement was thick with tension and paranoia, as the criminal underworld, private investigators, and rival authorities all desperately hunted for the missing Rembrandt. Driven by loyalty and a desire to see his friend's dangerous gambit concluded, Dottoli engineered a deeply secretive drop-off. Obsessed with ensuring he was not being tailed by mobsters or rogue investigators, Dottoli even executed a decoy run, hiding a framed mirror wrapped in a sleeping bag between trash barrels at a nearby ballpark to see if anyone would ambush him before the real exchange began. Once satisfied the coast was clear, Dottoli initiated contact with Massachusetts State Police Major John Regan. Calling Regan at home, Dottoli announced, "This is Kevin and we're on," and ordered the major to drive his wife's car with 2 sets of keys to a local payphone to wait for further instructions. Regan was soon directed to the parking lot of a Holiday Inn in Randolph, Massachusetts. Just after 7 p.m., as Regan arrived, Dottoli emerged from the shadows dressed in dark clothing and a ski mask. Dottoli approached the car and delivered a prearranged coded greeting, saying it was a nice night out. When Regan correctly replied about the stars, Dottoli climbed into the back seat. Inside the car, Dottoli found Regan accompanied by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Twomey, the federal prosecutor who held the power to reduce Connor's sentence. Demanding identification, Dottoli asked the men if they were armed. Both lied and claimed they were not. Acting as the intermediary, Dottoli ordered the 2 authorities out of the vehicle and sent them into a nearby disco, Peter's Place, instructing them to leave 1 set of car keys behind. Moments later, Lenny Biondi, codenamed Charlie, arrived at the hotel and transferred the actual Rembrandt, swaddled in a sleeping bag, into Regan's car, which Dottoli was now driving. Dottoli did not even turn the painting over to look at the masterpiece's face. Instead, he verified its authenticity by comparing a Polaroid photograph of the painting's backside and its identifying numbers to the panel in his hands. Relieved the handoff was real, Dottoli threw the car keys into the trunk, slammed it shut, and retreated to his hotel room to call the disco. When Twomey answered the phone, Dottoli instructed the men to walk outside and look inside their trunk. "If what you want is in that trunk, then turn. Face the building and put your hands into your belt," Dottoli commanded them, watching the scene unfold from a window above. When the 2 officials opened their trench coats to comply, Dottoli spotted the hidden firearms they had previously denied carrying. Regardless, the prize was secured, and the 2 nervous authorities carefully drove the sleeping bag-wrapped masterpiece directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The next morning, U.S. Attorney Gabriel held a press conference to announce the recovery, deliberately misleading the public to justify the controversial arrangement. To hide the fact that a masterpiece had been successfully weaponized as a legal bargaining chip, Gabriel parsed his words carefully, stating that no deals of any kind have been made with any federal prisoner, a statement that was only technically true because Connor was being held in a state county jail at the time. Gabriel further justified the return by falsely claiming that a public-spirited citizen had surrendered the painting out of fear for their family's safety from the criminal underworld. Participants in the exchange later described it in starkly different terms. Dottoli, relieved to be rid of the mafia's attention, looked back on the cloak and dagger operation as pretty fucking cool. Connor, who openly gloated about outsmarting the justice system, viewed the negotiation as a triumphant validation of his strategy to use cultural heritage as a legal shield. The 1975 Rembrandt theft was a pivotal moment in the history of art crime, establishing a dangerous systemic precedent that directly paved the way for the 1990 Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. By successfully trading the stolen MFA artwork, Myles Connor and his attorney proved to the criminal underworld that a masterpiece's true value did not lie in the black market, but rather in its utility as a high-value hostage to subvert the criminal justice system. It is an established historical fact that this legal loophole provided the ideological framework and motive for the devastating Gardner Museum robbery 15 years later. The direct connections between Connor and the Gardner Museum began well before the 1975 MFA heist. He and longtime mob associate Bobby Donati extensively cased the Gardner Museum around 1974. During these reconnaissance trips, they noted the museum's lack of theft insurance and weak physical security, recognizing that the institution would be forced to offer massive private ransoms independent of law enforcement constraints. When the Gardner Museum was finally struck on March 18, 1990, the details of the crime mirrored Connor's early reconnaissance in striking ways. Disguised as police officers, two thieves stole 13 artworks worth over $500 million, including masterful paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Manet, and Degas. However, the thieves inexplicably bypassed more valuable works by artists like Titian, Raphael, and Michelangelo, opting instead to steal the relatively valueless Napoleonic eagle finial and the 12th century Chinese gu. For investigators and art experts, the theft of these specific low-value items was puzzling, but they perfectly matched the specific trophy steals that Connor and Donati had coveted years prior. Because of his legendary reputation and his history with the MFA Rembrandt, Connor was the FBI's immediate primary suspect for the Gardner heist. However, it is an indisputable fact that Connor could not have physically participated in the 1990 robbery. He was securely locked in a federal penitentiary in Lompoc, California, serving a lengthy sentence for drug trafficking and the attempted sale of stolen art. Yet, from his prison cell, Connor claimed to know exactly who orchestrated the crime. He stated that Bobby Donati and another associate, David Houghton, executed the Gardner heist using his original 1970s blueprint. According to Connor, Houghton flew to California to visit him in prison shortly after the robbery, confessing that they had stolen the paintings to use as leverage to broker Connor's release from federal custody. Evidence both supports and contradicts Connor's claims, leaving the true identity of the thieves in the realm of theory. Supporting Donati's involvement is the highly specific theft of the finial and gu, which acts as a distinct signature linking the 1990 crime to Donati and Connor's earlier casing trips. Furthermore, high-ranking mafia captain Vincent Ferrara corroborated Donati's involvement. Ferrara stated that Donati visited him in jail 3 months before the heist, promising to do something to get him released. Ferrara claimed Donati returned after the robbery, confessed he had buried the artwork, and stated he planned to negotiate once the investigation cooled down. A friend of another gangster, Robert Guarente, also corroborated that Donati organized the robbery. Physical evidence strongly contradicts Connor's claim that David Houghton was one of the two men who physically entered the museum. The subdued guards described the two thieves as being of average or medium build, whereas Houghton was morbidly obese and weighed approximately 300 pounds. Connor later theorized that Donati and Houghton likely hired lower-level gangsters to carry out the actual break-in, but this remains unproven. While Connor's Donati-Houghton narrative remains a compelling theory, the FBI ultimately shifted its focus to a different faction of the Boston underworld. Federal authorities officially announced that they believed the thieves were members of a Dorchester-based gang loyal to mafia boss Frank Salem. Investigators theorized the heist was executed by associates of criminal Carmelo Merlino, specifically pointing to George Reisfelder and David Turner, who operated out of TRC Auto Electric. The FBI believes these men moved the art through criminal networks in Connecticut and Philadelphia, though no artwork was ever recovered during subsequent raids. In the years immediately following the 1990 Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, the investigation struggled to gain traction as the criminal underworld descended into violence. The possibility of recovering the stolen masterpieces grew increasingly bleak in 1991 when prime suspect Bobby Donati was brutally murdered in the midst of a gang war within the Patriarca crime family. Donati was found stabbed to death and left in the trunk of a car after his home was ransacked. With his murder, investigators feared that vital secrets regarding the heist and the location of the $500 million art cache may have died with him. A sudden breakthrough appeared to emerge in 1994 when museum director Ann Hawley received an anonymous letter from someone claiming to be a third-party negotiator. The writer established immediate credibility by sharing specific information about the heist that was known only to the museum and the FBI. According to the mysterious author, the paintings had originally been stolen to reduce a prison sentence, but because that opportunity had passed, the thieves no longer had a motive to keep the artwork. The negotiator claimed the masterpieces were being safely held in a climate-controlled environment in a non-common law country, and offered their safe return in exchange for absolute immunity and $2.6 million, which was to be deposited into an offshore bank account. To signal the museum's willingness to negotiate, the writer instructed Hawley to print a coded message in the Boston Globe. Believing this to be a highly credible lead, Hawley coordinated with the FBI and arranged for the requested coded message to be published in the newspaper's May 1, 1994 edition. A few days later, a second letter arrived in which the negotiator acknowledged the museum's compliance, but expressed intense fear over the massive scale of the federal and state investigation, stating they needed time to evaluate their options. The writer subsequently cut off all contact, and Hawley never heard from them again. As the investigation dragged into its fifth year, a critical legal milestone fundamentally altered the trajectory of the case. In 1995, the statute of limitations for the actual robbery expired, meaning that the thieves who bound the guards and cut the canvases from their frames could no longer be prosecuted for the break-in itself. With the threat of robbery charges officially off the table, federal prosecutors and museum officials shifted their entire focus toward the safe recovery of the cultural treasures, publicly declaring that anyone who willingly returned the items would not face prosecution. Authorities made it clear that while possession of stolen property technically remained a crime, they were fully prepared to offer immunity in exchange for the artwork, effectively offering a free pass to anyone holding the missing masterpieces. Despite this legal concession, the art remained hidden, prompting the FBI to aggressively target a Dorchester-based gang loyal to the Boston Mafia in the late 1990s. The authorities focused heavily on criminal Carmelo Merlino and his associates, specifically David Turner and Stephen Rossetti, whom informants claimed had access to the Gardner paintings. In 1999, the FBI launched a massive sting operation, arresting Turner, Merlino, Rossetti, and several others on the exact day they were preparing to execute an armed robbery of a Loomis Fargo vault. Investigators immediately used the severe impending sentences as leverage, bringing Turner in for questioning and explicitly offering to let him go free if he facilitated the return of the Gardner art. Turner adamantly denied knowing who stole the paintings or where they were hidden, later arguing in court that the FBI had deliberately entrapped him by allowing the Loomis Fargo plot to proceed solely to pressure him for information about the museum heist. The jury rejected his entrapment defense, and Turner, along with his accomplices, was sent to prison, leaving the FBI without their prime suspects and the empty frames at the Gardner Museum still awaiting their stolen masterpieces. When Myles Connor was officially released from federal prison on June 9, 2000, the notorious art thief stepped into a world that offered him few prospects. With a name synonymous with crime across Massachusetts and no legitimate work history, the aging outlaw opted for a quieter existence. He moved in with his girlfriend, Susie King, on a farm in Blackstone, Massachusetts, where he spent his days tending to livestock and appreciating the antique swords and artifacts he still legitimately owned. Nearly a decade later, in May 2009, Connor returned to his rock and roll roots for one last hurrah. Taking the stage at the Beachcomber in Quincy, a venue he had packed during his prime, Connor performed his first show in 20 years. The club's owner noted that despite having only placed a standard advertisement with no special promotion, the venue was entirely packed, with the audience seated and ready before the performance even began. Connor played a short set, highlighted by covers of Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire and Don't Take Your Guns to Town. Although his voice had weakened with age, he still managed to hit Cash's signature low register. It would be his final musical performance. While Connor lived out his retirement on the farm, the FBI's hunt for the missing Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum masterpieces continued, yielding a massive new lead in 2010. Robert Guarente, a Boston Mafia associate long suspected of being involved with the stolen art, had passed away from cancer in 2004. 6 years after his death, his widow, Aline, came forward to federal investigators with a startling revelation. She claimed that her late husband had indeed possessed some of the stolen paintings. According to her account, when Guarente fell ill in the early 2000s, he passed the masterpieces to a Manchester, Connecticut mobster named Robert Gentile for safekeeping. This revelation immediately shifted the focus of the massive federal investigation. Gentile vehemently denied the accusations, claiming he knew nothing of the art's whereabouts and had never been given the paintings. Nevertheless, this revelation prompted a massive federal push, culminating in a 2012 raid on Gentile's Manchester, Connecticut home. Underneath a false floor in a backyard shed, the FBI discovered a secret ditch, and in the basement, they found a handwritten list of the stolen artworks alongside their black market values. Despite this tantalizing discovery, no paintings were found, and Gentile vehemently denied any knowledge of their whereabouts. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. As the investigation into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist stretched into the 2010s, federal authorities desperately sought a breakthrough to recover the $500 million cache of stolen masterpieces. With physical leads stalling, the FBI turned to public pressure. In 2013, the Bureau announced with a high degree of confidence that they had identified the thieves as members of a Mid-Atlantic and New England criminal organization. By 2015, authorities formally confirmed that the two men who executed the robbery were deceased, ending any hopes of a direct prosecution. To spur new information, the museum's reward for the safe return of the art, which had been raised to $5 million in 1997, was doubled to a staggering $10 million in 2017, standing as the largest bounty ever offered by a private institution. Today, the passage of time has seen the deaths of nearly every key suspect and witness tied to the robbery, leaving the current state of the investigation largely frozen. Robert Gentile passed away in 2021 without ever revealing the location of the art. Rick Abath, the security guard who broke protocol by buzzing the thieves into the museum and who maintained his innocence his entire life, died in 2024 at the age of 57. Even Jeff Kelly, the lead FBI agent who hunted for the masterpieces for 22 years alongside museum investigator Anthony Amore, retired in the spring of 2024. The Venetian-style palazzo continues to display the empty gilded frames as silent placeholders, awaiting the return of the world's most valuable missing artworks. While the investigation into the crime he allegedly inspired continued to hit dead ends, notorious art thief Myles Connor transitioned into a remarkably quieter existence. Following his release from federal prison in 2000, Connor left his high-stakes criminal past behind, opting to live peacefully tending to livestock on a farm in Blackstone, Massachusetts, with his girlfriend, Susie King. His days of dramatic jailbreaks and rooftop shootouts were traded for caring for animals, a pursuit that took him to Carrollton, Georgia, to tend to King's beloved horse and other pets until she tragically passed away from a severe infection in 2021. Yet the aging outlaw could not entirely escape his legendary reputation. In 2018, Connor attempted to use the legal system to retrieve an array of antique firearms, swords, and armor that police had seized during a 1986 raid on his Dorchester apartment. He argued in the Norfolk County Superior Court that the items were legitimately inherited from his grandfather, but the jury ruled against him. His lifelong reputation as a master thief proved an insurmountable burden to proving legitimate ownership. Despite the setback, his passion for collecting never waned. On his 80th birthday, Connor walked into an upscale Japanese restaurant carrying a 12th century samurai sword, effortlessly charming the manager with his encyclopedic knowledge of the ancient weapon. Now in his 80s, residing quietly in New England, he remains a sharp, charismatic storyteller, sharing the history of his exploits with close confidants like his lifelong friend Al Dottoli. The legacy of Myles Connor is unlike any other in the annals of American crime. He was an anomaly, a Mensa-level genius and rock and roll frontman who blurred the lines between high society connoisseurship and the criminal underworld. Connor operated by a strict, Bushido-style moral code. He viewed violence as a failure of intellect. When forced to use firearms during heists, he insisted on warning shots, and during his famous 1966 shootout with a state trooper, he intentionally aimed low to avoid inflicting a mortal wound. He adamantly refused to hurt the weak, the old, the innocent, or the helpless, famously calling off a burglary when he found a sleeping house-sitter inside the target home. Instead, Connor rationalized his museum thefts by targeting only wealthy estates, billionaires, and institutions that he believed could absorb the loss, operating under the Robin Hood-esque philosophy that any valuable antique had already been stolen from someone else in history. Ultimately, Connor's most enduring and disastrous impact on the world was his strategic manipulation of the justice system. By successfully weaponizing the stolen Museum of Fine Arts Rembrandt to bypass federal sentencing guidelines in 1976, he created an adverse incentive loop that taught the criminal underworld that cultural heritage could be used as a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was this very strategy that provided the ideological framework for the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist. Though he traded the adrenaline of the heist for the quiet of old age, Myles Connor's ingenuity permanently altered decades of law enforcement tactics, ensuring his place as the charismatic architect of modern art extortion. Night Watch Files is a weekly show, but we're still a small independent production. From time to time, that means we may need to skip a week or occasionally two to keep up with other priorities and ensure each episode meets the standard we strive for. As the show grows, our goal is to eliminate those gaps entirely, aside from planned breaks between seasons. We sincerely appreciate your patience and continued support as we work toward that. If you'd like to help us get there sooner, please consider supporting the show through Patreon or by making a donation using the links in the description. For updates on upcoming episodes and any schedule changes, be sure to follow us on Instagram. The link is also in the description.